The Terrans perfected war. And when I say perfect, I mean truly and utterly mastered the art of war against any foe, to a point where their generals and armies seem to live by the words of their renowned and ancient tactician, known as Sun Tzu. I have read his literature, and I have found one of his wisdoms to be more prevalent in current Terran warfare than any other. Victorious warriors win first, then go to war, while defeated warriors go to war first, and then seek to win. I didn't think highly of this at first. Wars drag on, tactics change, soldiers adapt. How can that be universally true? That wasn't until I saw it with my own eyes. It all started with a political dispute in the Galactic Senate. It was about one tiny, barren, nearly insignificant system in the core of the galaxy. It would have been truly insignificant if not 7 different hyperlanes from either side of the galaxy converged there. One of which was an as of yet uncharted, but large cluster of systems only reachable through this one hyperlane. It was one of the very few choke points this side of the galaxy, important for trade and science, but also military. The dispute came to be because, early in its time as a galactic empire, the so-called Sacrum Terranum Imperium laid claim to it and fortified it heavily for exactly these reasons, and thus created the Greentext Postenost, Border Security Post East. Eventually, as time went on, and the galactic community was founded and territories expanded, the Phylaxian aristocracy was met with a dead end to its borders. Trapped between the sovereign Hitaxi systems, the fallen empire of the Archivists and the Rundaran People's Republic on one side, and the Terrans on the other. The Phylaxians, however, an insect-like species with a very high reproductivity rate, were now running out of worlds for their people to colonize. Now they were met with a dilemma. Both the Hitaxi and the Rundarans had been good allies to the Phylaxians ever since their people met, but neither could nor wanted to let the Phylaxians expand into their territory. One citing political instability, the other fighting with the same problems the Phylaxians faced. Meanwhile, making contact with the Archivists remained fruitless. That only left one other option for expansion. The Phylaxians and the Terrans had been off on the wrong foot ever since they met each other. Even though the spiritualist Phylaxians first were happy to encounter another society that seemed to respect spirituality and religion, they were very much disappointed when the sacrum, meaning holy in the Terranium Imperium, was merely a ploy, so to say. No, that's the wrong word for it. It was more of an honouring of their predecessors, of the empire that the current rulers of Earth drew their roots from, or rather to. Nearly nothing else connected them to this feudal society, except for the land their capital stood on. But still they prided themselves on it, basking in their cultural heritage, so to say, at least on the outside. On the inside, however, the Sacrum Terranum Imperium was an enlightened empire, their rule still governed by a Kaiser, passing on their title and reign to their oldest child, be it son or daughter. But their society was led by, apart from conservative and militaristic sense of self and nation, by rationality and science. They had abandoned gods and shrines to follow rational and reasonable thinking, and scientific breakthrough into the future. After many failed attempts to raise relations between the two nations, nearly always resulting in some sort of falling out between the two seemingly completely incompatible species, their relations have been frozen in a mutually agreed neutrality towards each other. Still, the Phylaxians tried their luck through diplomatic means. They tried to trade nearly everything they had for the system, with 2 exceptions: other systems and their sovereignty. The Terrans declined, stating that the security of their people had utmost importance for them. That was because out of the 7 hyperlanes, 2 connected back to Terran space, and all of the systems that came behind it were inhabited. Furthermore, through one hyperlane it was possible to reach Terra in less than 3 jumps, and through the other were systems essential to their economy, mining and forge work surrounded by mineral-rich asteroid belts. If they had given up the border post, these colonies would have become exclaves of the Imperium. Still, the Phylaxians continued to plead with them, ultimately even offering vassalage to the Imperium in exchange for this one single system. The human ambassadors and generals were nearly begging the Kaiser to accept this too-good-to-be-true treaty. Still, he declined. He didn't see this as an opportunity. he only saw two things: an exponentially growing possible threat and a desperate opponent. When a year later, the now late Kaiser Frederick was laid to rest after a long and prosperous rule, his daughter, Augustine, became the new Kaiserin. The Phylaxians saw this as a chance. An inexperienced ruler amidst advisors and generals she had not yet earned the trust of. At least they thought so. This was another quirk of this enlightened empire. Every possible heir to the throne was made to be the best ruler they could. For the Terrans, this meant the following: a relatively normal childhood and early adulthood. They were meant to live alongside their people, learn to know and be them, to know how to best treat them. But in between, their daily life was filled with lessons on wildly differing subjects: political science, history, military theory, economical science, legal studies, and everything else they needed to be a competent ruler. This also meant that every Kaiser knew every one of their advisors, teachers and generals in and out, as well as the other way around. They knew how they understood their field of practice by the way they thought it, and the advisors understood fully how the Kaiser understood them. This time it was no different, and the Kaiserin only had to continue where her father left off. She knew what her father thought of the Phylaxians, and what precautions he took for the events he expected to play out. Now you may be wondering how all of this ties back into the art of war. The Terrans did not only honour their predecessors with the name they chose, but also adopted and adapted the doctrines of the militaries that came before them. They already knew how they could defeat us. They knew how, when, and why they could and will defeat us. They knew they had won the war before it had even started. All of their soldiers were trained in their most modern tactics, be it in the open field in combined arms situations, on their own, in rural and urban combat and anything in between. Orbital shock troops took the place of renowned paratrooper divisions, and their legendary engineering yielded them the most versatile and fit air force, and Navy, space and aircraft. Oh, their Navy. Their deep space fleet, led by their imposing and, I have to admit, beautiful flagships, was the pride of the late Kaiser, led by the example of his namesake ancestor. A single fleet, stopped the Phylaxians dead in their tracks when they finally declared war, just as the Kaiser had predicted. The Phylaxians had lost nearly half a fleet before they decided to retreat. The Terrans also had casualties to lament, but only in the number of ships. They were able to rescue nearly all crew on the ships in question, and the fleet was still more than combat capable, yet they only received the order to hold their position, wait for the shipyards to complete reinforcing the fleet, and defend the system. The Phylaxians already began scrambling everything they had: reserves, militias, allies, and everything they could use to defend from the inevitable counterattack. An attack that never came. Still, they had dragged us into this war. They asked for weapons and equipment for their newly raised armies and navies, and the People's Republic delivered, while the Hitaxi outright joined the war. Still, the Terran navies lie at anchor at their home stations, vigilantly guarding the borders. Then the next wave of Phylaxians and Hitaxi crashed onto the shores of the Empire, only to be met with another defeat. The time which it took for the Phylaxians to spew out more and more armies was fascinating. After a while, even the Hitaxi had to roll back their active participation in the war effort, and resorting to a lend-lease program similar to us. Since manpower was seemingly no problem for the Phylaxian war economy, we only had to supply them the ships that needed to be manned. I am not going to lie, it was a lucrative business for us. For the longest time, I didn't know why the Imperium let them have at it for so long. Maybe they just wanted to put them in their place. Maybe they wanted to set an example, even though they could have just as well stormed and taken the Phylaxian home planet within a month if they had wanted to, and have just as good of an example. They just didn't. What I now know they did instead was to delay the confrontation, buy them time for a project they had been working on that would make admirals of times past proud. It all started when our and the Hitaxi transports suddenly started vanishing. At first it was only a few in irregular intervals, nothing that couldn't have been written off to the work of somewhat decent pirates. The only odd thing was, no one saw anything. No sensor gave off any anomalous readings. No alarm sounded at the presence of enemy fleets. But when full convoys with full military escorts started going dark in a matter of seconds, with no clue to anything that could have happened to them, our leadership began to grow concerned, when it was already too late. I know now in my maybe last moments that this was the start of what the Terrans called unrestricted submarine warfare, or rather the deep space equivalent. Back when their people were far from the reaches of space and their world was at war, fleets of submarines, naval vessels designed to operate underwater, terrorized all oceans on their planet. Completely unseen and with cold efficiency was it that these Wolfsrudel, the wolf packs, destroyed cargo ships transporting military equipment and personnel, as well as warships. And now I stand here on the bridge of my ship, face to face with one of these new wolf packs. One of 3, to be exact. An entire fleet with anything from corvettes to the Titan-class warship that led it, which was in complete stealth just minutes ago. The U-boat-class frigates have already locked onto my ship with their torpedoes. My only hope, and the only thing standing between the glassing of my homeworld, our capital, which I was meant to protect, as well as the capitals of the Phylaxians and the Hetaxi, and the lives of so many millions, is the unconditional surrender of all parties participating in the war against the Sanctum Tyrannium Imperium. This transmission will not be repeated. Farewell. I'm sorry.